We're starting a brand new series today, and I'm really excited about it. It's called Ask Yourself This, and the entire series is based on spirituality versus religion. Big difference between the two. Religion came into play about 6,000 years ago. It set down dictates and doctrines and creeds about how we should act in the world around us, what we should do, how we should be, what we should strive for. And for the most part, for 6,000 years, half the people anyway, have followed those dictates. If my religion says this, then that's what I will do. No matter how far-fetched or even ludicrous at times those religious dictates are, we follow them. I know I was raised in a very fundamentalist church, and some of the rules and regulations were nonsensical to me. I just couldn't figure out why anybody would want a group of people to live that way. And I remember when I was in high school, I had a friend of mine sleep over, and he happened to be a Catholic person. And the next morning we got up and we got ready to go to church, and he couldn't go to church because his church said, "Thou shalt not attend any other church but the Catholic Church." And he couldn't attend my church. And I wish somebody would have told me that. That I couldn't attend my church because it was a very miserable experience. It just confined me into this little box, almost robotic, where you moved along and you continually gave thanks to your Lord and Savior and all those other things. So, as we move into spirituality, it's a whole different story. We're not looking out there and trying to behave like little robots, doing this and doing that based on what a minister said, but rather we're going inward. Spirituality is an inward journey. There's so much more to us than we know. And if all of the knowledge that we've gained, the first 14 billion years of evolution, and that is just like 1% of all the knowledge that's there to discover. And it's especially important when it comes to ourselves. Now, in the book, spirituality leads us into discovering exactly who we are. And each and every one of us has a specific nature. You're unlike anybody else. Trillions and trillions of atoms had to come together. They had to collaborate. They had to conform to a specific design just to create you right here. You're an original. There's nobody else like you. Now, that's very important when it says that you're an original, because an original cannot be compared to anything else. And if you're an original, that means that there's a sense of perfection about you, that everything about you is right. Hard to believe. Most of our lives we've been told that's not true at all, that a lot of things about us are wrong. But in this series, when we start asking questions, we discover the answers, and we're moving towards finding that perfection within us that is so evident, and it's so obvious, and it's so easy, and it's so natural, that it just naturally begins to express itself. And as it does, all those anxieties and worries and stresses and wonders about whether I'm okay or not are just going to disappear. So the first question is, what do you know for sure? As I was reading the book, what do you know for sure? And I thought about that long and hard because I have kind of a philosophical mind, and I thought, well, I for sure know that I am. I am. Well, then the question said, you are what? Well, I am me. Well, then the question said, well, who's this me that you refer to? And if I ask you that question, who are you? You might stop and think, and you might respond the same way, I am me. Well, who is this me that you refer to? It seems like an easy question. I could say Duke, well, that's just my name. I could say I'm a minister, that's just my job. I could say I'm a father, that's just my family role. But who am I exactly? Who are you? And it became very, very difficult in asking that question because I didn't know. I don't know who I am. And that's the glory of this series, is because I'm going to discover just like you. We come into this world and we are free for the first couple of years. We are just a bundling expression of life. We have no discriminations. We have no prejudices. We have no low self-esteem. We have no repressions. We have no suppressions. We just are what we are, just free to be. Like every other creature outside of humanity, we're just free to be. But then as we get to be, maybe 2 years old or so, the world around us, the family, and social etiquette, our culture begins to mold us and make us into certain things. And as we grow up, little boys are taught how to be little boys. And little girls are taught how to be little girls. And if you come from a poor family, you're taught this is the way poor people act. Or a rich family, this is the way rich people act. Or if you go to school and you don't get the A's on the test and you get the F's, then you're the dumb person. And this is how a dumb person is. And this is how a better than average looking person is. And we have all these things that come around until eventually we're molded into this person that is playing out all these roles and playing out all these assignments that we've been given in order to meet somebody's expectations. Now, a good example of this, when I was a young boy, I was born in the late 40s, and World War II had just ended. The soldiers were coming home, and they brought an influence with them. They brought a soldier influence. All of a sudden, the stores were filled with toy soldier guns and miniature uniforms. And we began to be trained on how to be tough, how to be future warriors. And part of that training is, and almost every person in here, every man anyway, has experienced it. You heard, big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry. And if you hear that enough and enough and enough and enough, pretty soon you come to the determination, if I'm going to be a big boy, if I'm going to be a man someday, I don't cry. And so what happened for me as I grew up, I put this boundary in my mind with all the sensitivities and all those things that made me want to cry on one side, and on that boundary I built a big wall, a strong wall that could not be penetrated, and all of that was blocked off, that whole part of me. And many of you can relate with this. And there's times when I got yelled at and scolded and I wanted to cry, stuffed it back down. There's times when I got injured and I wanted to cry. There's times when I got my feelings hurt and I wanted to cry. There's times when I was just sad and I wanted to cry. But none of those desires, none of that natural urge ever came into fruition because it was considered a no-no. You don't do that. And it's the same thing with little girls. Little girls were taught to be a certain way. You're taught to be subservient in certain circles. You're taught not necessarily to use your mind, but to use your heart. You're taught to stay in the kitchen and cook and not get out there in the business field and really do what you want to do. And then when we get into school, we're graded A, B, C, D, and here's a C, you're an average. And so we're taught how average people are. And it goes on and on and on and on and on till we're molded into this adult. And by the time we're 18, we have told ourselves, this is based on the human research developers, we have told ourselves by the time we're 18 that I can't do this 180,000 times because we're not sure of ourselves, or we're taught that we couldn't do it, or we're told that we couldn't do it. 180,000 times an opportunity has been before us, and a little voice in our head says, I can't do this. By the time we're in our young adult years, and 70% of the self-talk we have going on in our head is either of a criticizing, condemning, or a fearful nature. 70% of the way we talk to ourselves. Now think about that. In tests that people give to study human behavior, oftentimes there's a question, how do you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? And on average, most people rate themselves a 5. Average. Now, on the surface, that seems like, well, that's okay. We're all average. There's got to be an average. But when you dig a little bit deeper, what exactly does that mean? If we're all average, it kind of means that we have it kind of means we got the short end of the stick when it comes to God. If God created it all, God created us, and we're average, you ended up with an average God. How'd that happen? Can we do a recall? He probably just slid through classes, never getting more than a C. Probably had to stay after school to redo some of his design work. Probably looked down on the other gods because all of his people coming out were just average. I think we should rebel. Something should happen. I don't want an average God.